Yuna always felt like she did not belong on Earth. She was 26 years old and worked as a junior researcher at Seoul's National Aerospace Institute. Every night, after her work was done, she would sit on the rooftop of her small apartment building and stare at the stars. Other people looked at the night sky and saw beautiful lights. Yuna looked at the night sky and felt homesick. She could not explain it. She had lived in Korea her entire life. She had memories of birthday parties, school exams, and family dinners. But deep inside her heart, there was always a quiet voice that whispered, "This is not where you belong." Her adoptive parents were kind and loving people. They owned a small bakery in Bizen, and they had raised Yuna with warmth and care since she was a baby. They had told her the story of how they found her many times. 26 years ago, on a cold winter night, a strange vehicle had crashed near the coast. The police and military had arrived quickly and blocked off the area. But before they could stop them, Yuna's adoptive parents had found something inside the wreckage, a baby girl, wrapped in silver cloth, completely unharmed. The government had taken the vehicle away. They had classified the incident and told everyone to never speak of it again. Yuna's adoptive parents had been allowed to keep the baby. They named her Yuna, which meant to allow or to consent in Korean. They raised her as their own daughter and never asked questions about where she came from. But Yuna asked questions. She asked them every day in the quiet corners of her mind. Where did she come from? Why did she survive a crash that should have killed her? Why did she feel so different from everyone around her? She never found answers. Until the night the message came dawn. It happened on a Tuesday at exactly 11:47 p.m. Yuna was sitting on her rooftop, looking at the stars as usual. Suddenly, she felt a warmth spreading through her mind. It was like someone had poured warm honey directly into her brain. Then she heard a voice. It was not coming from outside. It was coming from inside her head. "Yuna," the voice said. It was soft, melodic, and full of love. "My beautiful child, can you hear me?" Yuna should have been scared. She should have run away or called for help. But instead, she felt calm. She felt like she had been waiting for this voice her entire life. "Yes," she whispered into the night air. "I can hear you." The voice introduced herself as Yumbi. She said she was Yuna's biological mother. Then another voice joined in, deeper, warmer, equally full of love. He said his name was Taiwu, and he was Yuna's biological father. They told her the truth about her origin. Yuna was not human. She was born on a planet called Veloria Prime, located in a distant galaxy called Andromeda. Her species, the Valorians, were one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the universe. They had technology that humans could not even imagine. They lived for thousands of years in bodies that never grew old. They had conquered death, disease, and suffering long ago. But 26 years ago, a terrible war had broken out across the galaxy. Enemy forces were approaching Veloria Prime. Yumbi and Taiwu had no choice but to send their newborn daughter away to protect her. They had chosen Earth because it was remote, primitive, and safe. They had placed Yuna in a special vessel that would hide her life signs from enemy scanners. The vessel had crashed upon entering Earth's atmosphere, but the baby inside had survived, protected by advanced technology. For 26 years, Yumbi and Taiwu had waited. They had won the war. They had rebuilt their civilization. And now, finally, it was safe for Yuna to come home. "A ship will arrive in 3 days," Yumbi said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Please, my daughter, come home to us. We have missed you so much." Yuna did not sleep that night. She sat on the rooftop until the sun rose, thinking about everything she had heard. Part of her wondered if she was going crazy. Maybe she had imagined the whole thing. Maybe she was having a mental breakdown. But another part of her, the part that had always felt like a stranger on Earth, knew that the voices were real. This was the answer she had been searching for her entire life. For the next 3 days, Yuna went through the motions of her normal life. She went to work. She ate meals. She talked to her colleagues. But inside, she was counting down the hours until the ship arrived. She did not tell anyone about the message. Not her adoptive parents. Not her best friend GA. Not her boss at the institute. She was afraid they would think she was insane. She was also afraid they would try to stop her. On the third night, Yuna drove to an empty field outside of Seoul. The location had been given to her through another telepathic message from Yumbi. It was a remote area with no buildings, no lights, and no people. Just grass and darkness and stars. Exactly midnight, the ship appeared. It descended from the sky without a sound. It was silver and smooth, shaped like a teardrop, and it glowed with a soft inner light. It was the most beautiful thing Yuna had ever seen. The ship landed gently on the grass, and a door opened on its side. Light poured out, warm and golden. 2 figures stepped out of the light. They were tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlight on water. Their features were similar to human features, but more refined, more perfect. The woman had long silver hair that flowed like liquid mercury. The man had broad shoulders and kind eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Eun Bai and Taiwu. Her parents. They walked toward Yuna slowly, their faces filled with tears. When they reached her, they embraced her together, holding her between them like she was the most precious thing in the universe. "Our daughter," Yumbi whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Our beautiful daughter. You have grown so much. You look just like your grandmother. We never stopped thinking about you," Taiwu said, his deep voice thick with tears. "Every single day, we looked toward Earth and prayed that you were safe and happy." Yuna found herself crying too. She did not know these people. She had no memories of them. But somehow, being in their arms felt right. It felt like coming home after a long, long journey. "Are you ready to go?" Yumbi asked, pulling back to look at Yuna's face. "Are you ready to see your true home?" Yuna looked back toward the distant lights of Seoul. Somewhere out there, her adoptive parents were sleeping peacefully in their apartment above the bakery. Her friend GA was probably watching late-night television in her messy studio. Her colleagues were preparing for another day of work at the institute. She had a life here. She had people who loved her, but she also had questions that had haunted her for 26 years. And now she finally had a chance to find the answers. "Yes," Yuna said, turning back to face her biological parents. "I am ready." They led her into the ship. The interior was unlike anything Yuna had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of living light. The air smelled like flowers and fresh rain. There were no visible controls or machines. Everything seemed to operate through thought alone. Yuna sat between Yumbi and Taiwu as the ship rose silently into the sky. Through a transparent section of the wall, she watched Earth grow smaller and smaller below her. The cities became dots of light. The continents became shapes on a sphere. The sphere became a blue marble floating in infinite blackness. She felt no sadness. She felt no regret. She only felt anticipation. She was finally going home. The journey through space took 7 days. Yuna had expected the trip to feel long and boring, but it was the opposite. Every moment was filled with wonder. The ship traveled through something Yumbi called folded space, which allowed them to cross millions of light years in just a few days. Through the transparent walls, Yuna watched galaxies spin past like glowing pinwheels. She saw nebulas in colors she did not have names for. She saw stars being born and stars dying in brilliant explosions of light. But the most fascinating part of the journey was learning about her. Heritage.eumbi, and Taiwu spent hours telling Yuna about Valoria Prime and the Valorian civilization. They were one of the oldest species in the universe, they explained. Their civilization was over 3 million years old. They had solved all the problems that plagued younger species like humans. There was no war on Valoria Prime. There was no disease. There was no hunger, poverty, or suffering of any kind. The Valorians had also conquered death itself. Through advanced technology and biological engineering, they had extended their lifespans to thousands of years. Their bodies did not age. They did not get sick. They could live forever if they chose to, beautiful and healthy and strong. You will undergo the awakening when we arrive, Yumbi told Yuna with a gentle smile. Your human body is just a shell of disguise we created to help you survive on Earth. The awakening will remove the shell and reveal your true Valorian form underneath. What will I look like? Yuna asked. Beautiful, Taiwu said, his eyes shining with pride. You will be beautiful beyond anything humans can imagine. You will have our silver hair, our luminous skin, our enhanced senses. You will be able to communicate through thought, travel through folded space, and live for thousands of years. Yuna felt a thrill of excitement run through her body. All her life, she had felt like she was wearing a costume that did not fit. Now, she would finally be able to take off the costume and become her true self. Umbi also told Yuna about her siblings. She had an older brother named Do-yun and a younger sister named Somin. They have not been sent away during the war because they were older and could be protected on Valoria Prime. They had grown up hearing stories about their lost sister, and they were very excited to finally meet her. Do-hyun is serious and responsible, Umbi said. He works on the Council of Wisdom, helping to guide our civilization. Somin is playful and curious. She loves art and music and exploring new places. You will love them both, and they will love you. On the 7th day of the journey, the ship emerged from folded space above Valoria Prime. Yuna pressed her face against the transparent wall and gasped. The planet was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was larger than Earth, with swirling patterns of blue, silver, and gold covering its surface. Rings of crystalline light orbited around its equator, sparkling like diamonds in the light of the nearby sun. Yuna could see continents that glowed with soft bioluminescence, forests of trees that seemed to be made of glass, and oceans that shimmered with a silver metallic sheen. Welcome home, Taiwu said softly. Placing his hand on Yuna's shoulder, the ship descended through the atmosphere, passing through clouds that smelled like vanilla and honey. Below them, the capital city of Harran came into view. Yuna had seen beautiful cities on Earth, Seoul, Paris, Tokyo, but nothing had prepared her for this. Harran was a city of towers that reached toward the sky like frozen flames. The buildings were made of materials that looked like glass and crystal and solidified light. Bridges of pure energy connected the towers, and small vehicles floated through the air like schools of glowing fish. The ship landed in a large plaza in the center of the city. Through the walls, Yuna could see thousands of Valorians gathered there, all of them looking toward the ship with expressions of joy and anticipation. They are here to welcome you, Yumbi said, taking Yuna's hand. The whole city has been waiting for this day. The door of the ship opened, and Yuna stepped out into the golden light of Valoria Prime. The crowd erupted into cheers, not the loud, chaotic cheers of human crowds, but a harmonious wave of joy that Yuna could feel in her mind as well as hear with her ears. The Valorians were communicating their happiness directly into her consciousness, and it was overwhelming in the most wonderful way. Two figures pushed through the crowd and ran toward her. The first was a tall man with sharp features and silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The second was a young woman with a round face and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Do-hyun and Somin, her brother and sister. Do-hyun reached her first. He was formal for just a moment, studying her face with serious eyes. Then his expression cracked into a wide smile, and he pulled her into a tight hug. "Little sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You look just like the images we have of grandmother when she was young. I have waited so long to meet you." Somin did not wait for her turn. She threw herself at Yuna while Do-hyun was still holding her, creating a messy group hug that made all three of them laugh. "I knew you would be wonderful," Somin said, bouncing with excitement. "I told everyone you would be wonderful, and I was right. Oh, there is so much I want to show you. The gardens, the music halls, the floating islands, you are going to love everything." That night, Yuna sat with her family in a palace that overlooked an endless ocean of light. The sun had set, but the sky was not dark. It glowed with soft colors: purple, pink, gold as bioluminescent. Particles in the atmosphere danced and swirled. Servants brought trays of food that looked like edible jewels. Yuna tasted fruits that exploded with flavors she could not describe, drinks that fizzed with tiny lights, and delicate pastries that melted on her tongue like clouds. Everything was perfect. Everything was beautiful. Umbi sat close to Yuna, holding her hand throughout the meal. Taiwu told stories about Yuna's grandparents, who had been great leaders in Valorian history. Do-hyun talked about his work on the council, trying to make it sound boring to be modest, but Yuna could tell he was passionate about it. Somin kept interrupting everyone to point out interesting things in the sky or to suggest places they should visit together. Yuna looked around at her family, her real family, her biological family, and felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This was what she had been missing her entire life. This was where she belonged. But even as she smiled and laughed and enjoyed the feast, a small part of her mind noticed something strange. It was just a tiny thing, barely worth mentioning. But it stuck in her awareness like a splinter under the skin. She had been on Valoria Prime for several hours now. She had seen thousands of Valorians in the plaza, at the palace, and on the streets. They were all beautiful, all graceful, all seemingly happy. But she had not seen a single child. Not one baby. Not one toddler. Not one young person still growing up. Everyone she had seen was fully grown, ageless, and perfect. Yuna told herself it did not mean anything. Maybe Valorian children were kept in special areas. Maybe they grew up very quickly. Maybe she just had not been looking in the right places. She pushed the thought away and focused on the joy of the moment. But the splinter remained, buried deep, waiting to work its way to the surface. For the next 3 days, Yuna explored her new home with wonder and delight. She had no idea that everything she was seeing was a beautiful lie. She had no idea that the truth was waiting for her in a dark corner of the city, hidden behind doors that were never supposed to open. She had no idea that her perfect family had brought her here not to welcome her home, but to harvest her like a ripe fruit from a carefully tended tree. But she would find out soon enough, and when she did, nothing would ever be the same. The awakening ceremony was scheduled for the 7th day after Yuna's arrival. Until then, she was free to explore the city of Harran. Somin became her guide, leading her through streets of crystalline stone, across bridges of solidified light, and into buildings that seemed to breathe with their own inner life. Everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. And slowly, everything started to feel wrong. The first thing Yuna noticed was the stillness. The city was not empty. Thousands of Valorians walked through the streets, sat in gardens, and gathered in public spaces. But there was no energy, no urgency, no chaos. Nobody was rushing to get somewhere. Nobody was arguing about anything. Nobody was building anything new or tearing anything old down. The city felt like a museum where all the exhibits happened to be alive. Yuna tried to talk to the locals. She stopped a woman who was sitting by a fountain and asked her what she did for work. Work? The woman repeated, as if she did not understand the question. I do not work. I simply exist. I enjoy the fountain. I have been enjoying this fountain for 300 years. Yuna blinked. 300 years? The same fountain? It is a beautiful fountain, the woman said with a serene smile. Why would I need another one? Yuna walked away feeling disturbed. She visited the libraries next. They were massive buildings that contained the knowledge of 1 billion worlds. According to Soman, Yuna expected them to be crowded with scholars and researchers, the way libraries on Earth were crowded with students. But the libraries of Harin were nearly empty. A few Valorians wandered through the endless halls, but none of them seemed to be reading or studying anything. Why does nobody use the libraries? Yuna asked Soman. Her sister shrugged. We already know everything we need to know. The libraries are for preservation, not for learning. Learning implies that there is something new to discover, and we discovered everything important millions of years ago. Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. She loved learning. She loved the thrill of discovering something new, of solving a problem nobody had solved before. The idea of a world where there was nothing left to discover seemed like a nightmare, not a paradise. She also noticed that the Valorians did not create anything new. The art in the galleries was beautiful, but it was all ancient. Some of it was millions of years old. When Yuna asked about contemporary artists, Soman laughed gently. Why would we create new art when we already have perfect art? New art would just be a worse copy of what already exists. It is more logical to appreciate what has already been created. The music was the same. The architecture was the same. Even the food was the same recipes that had been perfected thousands of years ago and never changed since. Yuna tried to talk about these concerns with her family at dinner on the 5th night. She asked Yunbi why nobody on Valoria Prime seemed to want anything new. Yunbi smiled patiently. That is because we have achieved perfection, my dear. When you have everything you need, there is no reason to want more. Wanting more is a primitive instinct, a survival mechanism from the days when resources were scarce. We evolved beyond that long ago. But what about curiosity? Yuna pressed. What about the joy of discovery? What about passion and excitement and the thrill of creating something that has never existed before? The table went silent. Yunbi, Taiwu, Do-Yun, and Soman all looked at Yuna with expressions of gentle concern, as if she had said something embarrassing. Those are human emotions, Do-Yun said carefully. They are useful for primitive species who need motivation to survive and reproduce. But they are also sources of suffering. Passion leads to disappointment. Excitement leads to boredom. The thrill of creation leads to the pain of destruction. We have eliminated these emotions to achieve lasting peace and happiness. Do not worry, Taiwu added kindly. After the awakening, you will understand. Your human emotions will fade away, and you will experience true contentment for the first time in your life. Yuna nodded and smiled, but inside she felt cold. She did not want her emotions to fade away. Her emotions were who she was. Her curiosity, her passion, her excitement, her joy. These were the things that made her feel alive. Without them, she would just be a beautiful shell walking through an eternal museum. On the 6th night, Yuna could not sleep. She lay in her bed in the palace, staring at the glowing ceiling, thinking about everything she had seen and heard. Something was very wrong with Valoria Prime. She could feel it in her bones, but she could not figure out what it was. Then she remembered the question that had been nagging at her since her first day on the planet. Where were the children? She had been here for almost a week now. She had visited dozens of locations across the city. She had seen thousands of Valorians, and not a single one of them had been a child. Yuna got out of bed and put on her clothes. The palace was quiet at night, not because Valorians needed sleep, but because they followed ancient routines that had not changed in millions of years. She slipped out of her room and walked through the empty corridors. She needed answers. Real answers, not the gentle deflections her family kept giving her. She wandered through the palace until she found a terminal, a Kaun device for accessing the Central Information Network. She placed her hand on it, expecting to be asked for permission. Instead, the terminal lit up and welcomed her. "Good evening, Yunez. You have full access to all systems. How may I assist you?" Yuna was surprised. She had expected restrictions. But then she remembered what Yumbi had told her on the ship. Yuna's mental signature was recognized as part of the ruling family. She had clearance to go anywhere and access anything. "Show me the population statistics for Valoria Prime," she said. Dot numbers and charts appeared in the air in front of her. Yuna studied them carefully. The total population of the planet was approximately 2.3 billion. The average age was 847,000 years. The birth rate was 0. The death rate was also 0.0 births. 0 deaths. For how long? Yuna scrolled through the historical data. The last natural birth on Valoria Prime had occurred 1.2 million years ago. Her blood ran cold. How is the population maintained if nobody is born? She asked the terminal. The terminal hesitated for a moment. Then it said, "That information is classified. Only members of the High Council may access it." Yuna frowned. She was supposed to have full access to all systems. Why was this one thing restricted? She tried a different approach. "Show me records of off-world activities." A new set of data appeared. The Valorians maintained outposts in 12 different star systems. They sent ships to thousands of planets across multiple galaxies. But for what purpose? Yuna dug deeper into the records. Most of them were boring administrative file supply shipments, diplomatic communications, scientific observations. But then she found a category she did not recognize: harvest worlds. There were 847 planets listed under this category. Earth was one of them. Yuna felt her heart pounding in her chest. Harvest worlds. What did that mean? What were they harvesting? She tried to access the details, but again the terminal told her the information was classified. There was one place where she might find answers. The archive. It was a restricted section of the central library, accessible only to the High Council. But if her mental signature could open palace terminals, maybe it could open other doors too. Yuna left the palace and walked through the sleeping city toward the library. The streets were empty. The buildings glowed softly in the eternal twilight. Everything was peaceful and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. She reached the library and found the entrance to the archive. It was a door made of solid crystal, with no visible handle or lock. She placed her hand on it, half expecting an alarm to sound. The door slid open without a sound. Yuna stepped inside. The archive was dark, lit only by soft blue lights along the floor. Rows of data crystals stretched into the distance like an endless forest of frozen memories. Yuna walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found a terminal and placed her hand on it. "Show me everything about the Harvest Worlds program," she said. The terminal hummed. Then it began to speak. And Yuna learned the truth that would shatter her world. The terminal's voice was calm and mechanical as it explained the history of the Harvest Worlds. Programmed 3 million years ago, the Valorians had been a young species, full of passion and creativity and drive. They had built their civilization through innovation and struggle, just like humans were doing now. They had experienced love and loss, triumph and tragedy, joy and suffering. These experiences had given them something the terminal called vitality, the raw energy of consciousness, the spark that made living beings truly alive. But then the Valorians had achieved immortality. At first, it had seemed like the ultimate victory. No more death. No more disease. No more aging. They could live forever in perfect bodies, surrounded by perfect beauty, experiencing perfect peace. But immortality came with a cost. Without death, there was no urgency. Without suffering, there was no growth. Without challenges, there was no innovation. Over thousands of years, the Valorians slowly stopped creating new things. They stopped having new ideas. They stopped feeling new emotions. Their minds became frozen, crystallized, incapable of change. And worst of all, they stopped having children. Reproduction required vitality, that spark of life, that fire of consciousness. But the Valorians had used up all their vitality long ago. Their immortal bodies could continue to exist forever, but they could not create new life. They could not even repair the slow decay of their own minds. Valoria Prime was not a paradise. It was a dying civilization wearing the mask of perfection. The High Council had discovered this problem 2 million years ago. They had searched for a solution and found one on the primitive worlds scattered across the universe. Young species like humans still possessed enormous amounts of vitality. They burned with passion, creativity, love, anger, hope, and despair. They lived short lives filled with intense experiences. And this vitality could be harvested. The process was simple. Valorian agents would visit primitive worlds and select exceptional individuals, usually infants, who showed unusual potential. These infants would be taken from their home planets and raised in controlled environments designed to maximize their emotional and intellectual development. They would experience love and loss, success and failure, joy and pain. Every experience would generate more vitality, which would accumulate in their consciousness like water in a reservoir. When the subjects reached maturity, they would be brought to Valoria Prime for the awakening ceremony. But the awakening was not a transformation. It was an extraction. The subject's consciousness would be dissolved, and their accumulated vitality would be distributed among the Valorian elite. A single human with high vitality could sustain hundreds of Valorians for centuries. Earth had been designated as a harvest world 600 years ago. Since then, 47,000 humans had been harvested. Una stood in the dark archive, her body shaking, her mind racing. She could not believe what she was hearing. It could not be true. Her parents loved her. They had cried when they saw her. They had held her in their arms and called her their miracle child. But the terminal continued speaking, and the truth became impossible to deny. She asked the terminal to show her file. A holographic display appeared in the air, showing detailed records of her entire life. There were images of her as a baby, being placed in the crash vessel. Images of her growing up in Bazan. Images of her at school, at university, at work. The Valorians had been watching her every moment of her life. There were graphs showing her vitality levels over time. The numbers spiked during periods of intense emotion. Her first heartbreak, her graduation day, the death of her grandmother, the moment she received her first research grant. Every joy and every sorrow had been recorded and measured. At the bottom of the file, there was a note written by Yumbi herself. Specimen Y7749, designated Una, shows exceptional vitality accumulation. Emotional range is unusually broad. Creative capacity is in the top 0.01% of all harvested subjects. Intelligence is exceptional. Recommended for priority extraction. Expected yield, approximately 400 years of High Council sustenance. Una read the note 3 times. Specimen. That was what she was to them. Not a daughter. Not a miracle child. A specimen. A crop to be grown and harvested. A battery to be drained. Everything had been a lie. The crash 26 years ago had not been an accident. The Valorians had deliberately placed her on Earth, knowing that human parents would find her and raise her with love. They had chosen Korea specifically because its culture would push her to excel academically and professionally. They had monitored her development, making small adjustments when necessary. A scholarship here, a chance meeting there, to ensure she grew into the perfect vessel of vitality. The message from the stars had not been a reconnection with her true family. It had been a recall notice. The crop was ripe. Time to harvest. Yuna felt something changing inside her. All her life, she had tried to be good. She had tried to be kind, polite, and understanding. She had always assumed that if she was nice to others, others would be nice to her. That was what humans did. That was how civilization worked. But the Valorians did not think of her as part of their civilization. They thought of her as food. The sadness and disbelief she had been feeling began to transform into something else. Something hotter. Something sharper. Anger. Pure, burning, human anger. She thought about all the other humans who had been harvested. 47,000 people. 47,000 lives. Each one of them had been somebody's child, somebody's friend, somebody's love. Each one of them had dreams and hopes and fears. Each one of them had been murdered so that these beautiful, eternal, empty creatures could continue their meaningless existence for a few more centuries. And nobody on Earth knew. Nobody on Earth could fight back. Humanity thought they were alone in the universe, struggling to reach the stars. They had no idea that an ancient species was quietly kidnapping their children and eating their souls. Yuna made a decision. She was not going to let them harvest her. She was not going to let them harvest anyone else. She was going to find a way to stop them or die trying. She spent the rest of the night in the archive, reading everything she could find. She learned about Valorian technology. She learned about their weaknesses. She learned about the awakening ceremony and how it worked. The ceremony used a device called the extraction altar. It was connected to the planet's power grid and could channel enormous amounts of energy. When a subject was placed on the altar, the device would scan their consciousness, dissolve it into pure vitality, and distribute the energy to designated recipients. But the device could also work in reverse. In the early days of the harvest program, there had been experiments with amplification instead of extraction. The idea was to use the altar to boost a subject's vitality and spread it to others, essentially making more Valorians capable of feeling emotions again. But the experiments had failed. The Valorian minds were too crystallized, too frozen to accept the injection of raw vitality. The subjects had experienced overwhelming emotional chaos and died. The High Council had abandoned the amplification research and focused on extraction instead. But Yuna was not looking to help the Valorians. She was looking for a weapon. The sun was rising over Harin when Yuna finally left the archive. The city was beginning to wake up. Beautiful and peaceful and completely unaware of the monster hiding behind its perfect facade. Tomorrow was the 7th day. Tomorrow was the awakening ceremony. Yuna walked back to the palace with calm steps and a face that showed nothing but serene happiness. When she met Umbi in the hallway, she smiled and hugged her mother warmly. "I cannot wait for the ceremony," she said. "I am ready to become my true self." Yumbi beamed with joy and love, or what passed for love in her frozen, ancient heart. "We are so proud of you, my daughter. Tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of your existence." Yuna smiled back. Tomorrow would be beautiful, she thought, but not in the way Yumbi expected. Tomorrow, the Valorians would learn why humans were not just a harvest. Tomorrow, they would learn why humans were a force of nature. And tomorrow, nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The awakening ceremony began at dawn. 10,000 Valorians gathered in the grand amphitheater a massive structure of crystal and light that could hold the entire population of a human city. They sat in perfect rows, their minds linked together in a network of shared consciousness. They were all waiting to witness the harvest of the exceptional specimen from Earth. At the center of the amphitheater stood the extraction altar. It was a platform made of pure crystalline energy, connected to cables of light that ran deep into the ground. The altar hummed with power, ready to dissolve Yuna's consciousness and distribute her vitality to the High Council members who sat in the front rows. Umbi and Taiwu stood beside the altar, dressed in ceremonial robes that shimmered like liquid silver. They looked happy and proud. This was the moment they had been waiting for 26 years. Their investment was finally going to pay off. Yuna was led into the amphitheater by Do-Yoon and So-min. She wore a simple white gown, and her feet were bare against the cold crystal floor. To everyone watching, she looked peaceful and accepting, like a willing participant in a sacred ritual. Nobody knew about the changes she had made to the altar during the night. The crowd fell silent as Yuna approached the platform. Taiwu raised his hands and spoke, his voice echoing through every mind in the amphitheater. Today, we welcome our daughter home. Today, she becomes one of us. Today, her vitality will flow into our eternal family, sustaining us for centuries to come. Yuna climbed the steps to the altar. She could feel the energy humming beneath her feet, ready to tear her apart. She looked out at the sea of beautiful, empty faces. 10,000 Valorians, waiting to consume her life force like vampires drinking blood. She thought about the 47,000 humans who had stood where she was standing now. She thought about their fear, their confusion, their final moments of consciousness before they were dissolved into nothing. She thought about their families back on Earth, who had never known what happened to their lost children. She thought about her adoptive parents in Bizen. They had loved her with all their hearts. They had raised her, protected her, celebrated her successes, and comforted her in her failures. They were her real parents, not these beautiful monsters who saw her as nothing more than food. Umbi stepped forward and took Yuna's hands. Her silver eyes were shining with tears of joy. "Are you ready, my daughter?" Yuna smiled. "I have a question first." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. This was not part of the ritual. "Of course, my dear," Umbi said, her smile becoming slightly strained. "What is your question?" Yuna looked directly into her mother's eyes. How many humans have you harvested from Earth?" The amphitheater went completely silent. Umbi's face went pale. Taiwu stepped forward, alarm flashing across his features. "Yuna, this is not the time for how many." Yuna's voice rang through the shared consciousness like a thunderclap. Every Valorian in the amphitheater flinched at the raw emotion behind the words. They had not felt anything that intense in millions of years. The number came to Yuna from Umbi's panicking mind. 47,000. Over the past 600 years, Yuna projected the number into the collective consciousness, forcing every Valorian present to see it, to understand it, to know exactly what their beautiful civilization was built on. 47,000 people, Yuna said, her voice cold with fury. 47,000 lives. 47,000 children stolen from their families, raised like cattle, and slaughtered for your convenience. The crowd began to murmur. Some of the Valorians looked uncomfortable. Others looked confused. Most of them had never thought about where their sustaining vitality came from. It was simply something that appeared during harvest ceremonies, like rain falling from the sky. "You wanted my vitality," Yuna continued, climbing onto the altar. "You wanted the fire that makes humans human. The creativity, the passion, the love and anger and hope and despair. All the messy, chaotic, beautiful emotions that you threw away millions of years ago." She placed her hands on the crystalline surface of the altar. It recognized her touch and began to glow brighter. But you forgot something important about fire. Yumbi stepped toward the altar, her face twisted with fear. Yuna, stop! You do not understand what you are doing. I understand perfectly, Yuna said. I spent all night in your archive, reading your secrets. I know how this altar works. I know it can extract consciousness and distribute vitality. And I know it can do the reverse. Taiwu's eyes widened with horror. The amplification experiments, they killed the subjects. If you reverse the altar, you will die. Maybe, Yuna said. But I am not trying to survive. I'm trying to wake you up. She closed her eyes and pushed. Every memory of her human life flooded into the altar. The taste of her mother's homemade bread on Sunday mornings. The smell of rain on Seoul streets in the summer. The ache of her first heartbreak when the boy she loved chose someone else. The thrill of scientific discovery when her research produced unexpected results. The laughter of friends at late-night gatherings. The tears of loss when her grandmother died in her arms. The stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to give up that defined her species. Altar amplified everything and broadcasted into the collective consciousness of every Valorian on the planet. The Valorians screamed. For the first time in 3 million years, they felt what it truly meant to be alive. Not the peaceful emptiness of immortality, but the chaotic, painful, beautiful experience of mortality. Every emotion they had suppressed, every passion they had forgotten, every spark of genuine existence they had traded away for eternal safety, all of it crashed into them like a tidal wave. Some of them could not handle it. Their ancient minds, crystallized by millions of years of stagnation, shattered under the overwhelming input. They simply faded into light and disappeared, unable to process the intensity of human emotion. But others survived. Across the amphitheater, Valorians were collapsing to their knees, weeping with tears they had not shed in eons. They were laughing with joy they had forgotten how to feel. They were screaming with rage, trembling with fear, burning with passion that had been dead inside them for longer than human civilization had existed. The crystalline city of Harin began to change. Buildings that had stood frozen for millions of years started to shift and reshape themselves, responding to the newly awakened emotions of their inhabitants. New colors appeared in structures that had been the same shade for eons. New music began to play in the streets. New ideas began to spark in minds that had been silent for too long. Yuna stood at the center of it all, exhausted but alive. The altar had cracked beneath her hands. The vitality it had tried to extract from her had instead flowed through her and into the Valorian collective, changing them forever. She had not been consumed. She had been the catalyst. Yunbi crawled toward her, tears streaming down her shimmering face. For the first time since Yuna had met her, she looked genuinely confused, genuinely emotional, genuinely alive. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I gave you what you really needed," Yuna said, looking down at the creature who had planned to consume her. "Not my life, but a reminder of how to live." She stepped off the altar and walked through the crowd of transformed Valorians. They parted before her like water before a ship. Some of them reached out to touch her as she passed, their faces filled with wonder and gratitude. She had hurt them, yes. She had forced them to feel pain they had avoided for millions of years. But she had also given them something precious, the ability to feel anything at all. She reached the edge of the amphitheater and looked back. Taiwu was kneeling beside Yumbi, holding her in his arms. Dohyun was sitting on the ground, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Somin was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by emotions she had never experienced before. "Where are you going?" Taiwu called out, his voice broken. "Home," Yuna said. Someone needs to warn Earth about the harvest worlds. And then humanity and your people need to have a conversation about the future of this galaxy. She paused at the doorway and looked back one more time. You spent millions of years thinking of humans as nothing but food. You thought we were primitive, weak, and disposable. You thought our short lives and intense emotions made us inferior to your eternal peace. She smiled a fierce, defiant, utterly human smile. But you were wrong. Our mortality is not a weakness. It is our greatest strength. Because we know we are going to die, we live every moment with passion and purpose. We create and destroy and rebuild. We love fiercely, fight desperately, and never, ever give up. She stepped through the doorway into the golden light of Valoria Prime. We are not harvest. We are not food. We are not specimens to be studied and consumed. She walked toward the landing platform where the ship that had brought her waited. We are humanity, and we burn. In the years that followed, Una became Earth's first interstellar ambassador. The Valorians, transformed by their encounter with human vitality, became humanity's first galactic allies. They shared their technology and knowledge freely, working to repair the damage caused by millions of years of harvesting. Together, they confronted other ancient species who had treated younger civilizations as resources to be exploited. Some of these species chose to change, like the Valorians had. Others refused and were met with the combined might of two civilizations that had learned to value life in all its chaotic, beautiful forms. The Harvest Worlds program ended forever. The 47,000 humans who had been consumed could never be brought back. But their sacrifice was not forgotten. Monuments were built on Valoria Prime and on Earth, honoring the victims and reminding both species of the horrors that had been committed. And in the center of the grand amphitheater, where the extraction altar had once stood, there was now a garden. It was filled with flowers from Earth, roses and lily and cherry, blossoms growing alongside, crystal plants from Valoria Prime. It was a symbol of the new relationship between the two species. Above the garden, carved into a massive crystal arch, were words in both human and Valorian languages. We do not harvest life. We celebrate it. Una visited the garden once a year, on the anniversary of the day she had changed the galaxy forever. She would stand among the flowers, close her eyes, and remember who she really was. Not a Valorian princess. Not a harvest specimen. Not even a hero. Just a human. A small, mortal, insignificant human. And that was enough. That was everything.